before. You're going to see 3 pedals on the floor. Your right pedal is your brake. The middle pedal is reverse. The left pedal is a clutch. Now they call it a clutch, but it doesn't work like a standard clutch that we use today. I'm going to show you how this works. I have a parking brake over here.
Where's the gas pedal?
There is no gas pedal.
Okay.
That's a great question. You're saying, how do I make it go? You see this right here? This is your accelerator.
Wow.
So it has a hand throttle.
The Model T has an inline 4-cylinder engine with only 20 horsepower. It could go up to 45 miles per hour if you're on a slight downhill with the wind behind you. Oh, and here's one more idiosyncrasy with the Model T. The 10-gallon fuel tank doesn't have a fuel gauge on the dash, so you kind of just have to guess how far you've gone and assume you get about 20 miles to the gallon.
I'll start with how the legend was born.
I thought it was derived from the race-bred 288 GTO Evoluziones. Cars that were designed for the old Group B racing formula, but Group B died, and then Enzo Ferrari saw it and thought, what better car to celebrate the 40th anniversary of his wonderful company.
In fact, this was the last ever Ferrari to be personally signed off by Enzo himself. To most drivers, the Ferrari was only ever a dream because it was not cheap.
When the F40 went on sale in 1987, it cost £193,000. Now that doesn't include any adjustment for inflation. In today's money, it would have cost £500,000.
I finally managed to get my hands on one of a number of classics from his rather impressive stable. A car which needs no introduction. You're looking at a 1965 Aston Martin DB5, finished in silver birch, which comes with a raft of upgrades to beef up the power, handling, and this car is valued well over £1 million. But are DB5s any good to drive? Or are the values of these cars just overinflated by its Hollywood stardom? I've had to sacrifice myself for the full day in order to drive it and find out.
I first drove a DB5 a few years back. One of the first things that you notice is it's not quite as fast as you might expect it to be. This would not keep up with an F355 through the Alps, as it so famously did in GoldenEye.
The most redeeming thing about the Miura would be the fact that there's only so many of them. It's highly collectible. It's exciting because it's unusual, it's small, it's exotic, it's still exotic today, and it was significant in its styling. I think it's the car that put Lamborghini on the map. My name is Dennis Varney, and I'm driving a 1970 Lamborghini Miura S.
The Jaguar E-Type is, fair to say, one of the most iconic cars to slink over the earth. Its smooth throwing lines enraptured the world in the 60s. Now, any mention of the E-Type must, legally, come with that quote from Enzo Ferrari, who said it was the most beautiful car ever made. Suffice to say, the E-Type turns heads. It's good fun and all, smoking round town in an E-Type, looking all smooth, suave and sophisticated, but there's a thing about original E-Types that people don't talk about. They're not very good to drive. The thing is, these are cars that were designed for the 60s and then dragged through to the 70s. Compared to modern stuff, well, they're not going to be all that much cop. However, if you just can't live without some E-Type in your life, the team at E-Type UK appear to be able to fix all of the ills and create the perfect Jag to your specification. The sky is the limit.
I bought my first Mini probably 40-something years ago, paid about the equivalent of $5 for it. It was the British equivalent of a Volkswagen. Every young kid needed a runabout cheap car, and this was mine. For some reason I migrated towards a Mini, and once you drive one you fall in love. I think the Mini was just a revolutionary vehicle from its introduction. I don't think that even the designers had any idea what was going to unfold here with 40 years of production, but it was done initially for fuel, and the Mini was really introduced as an economy car, not with the intentions of having turned into the little performance pocket rocket that it is today. The initial Mini in its introduction in 1959, I think, was rated at 34 horsepower.
Designers don't care about what other people think cars should look like. They have the confidence they can build cars that are beautiful, elegant, practical and comfortable. And in 1955, this was the result, the Citroën DS. Now imagine the world in 55. This was the very beginning of the space race. So when this car was unveiled at the Paris Auto Show, it really caught people's attentions, partly because it looks like a spaceship, especially compared to everything else that was on the road around then. And some of the technology that it has on board is still more cutting edge than we see in cars today.
For what some call the ultimate vintage car, the DS was awfully advanced. The headlights swivel to highlight the road. It came with hydropneumatic suspension, a revolution replacing mechanical springs with a pressurized fluid for a super smooth ride on France's pothole-packed post-war roads. And it still works on America's rough roads today.
So these days, we've become pretty blasé with the figures that surround both supercars and hypercars. But back when this was launched, nothing fitted the brief that was given to the engineers to design this car. So it was predominantly instigated by the late chairman of the Volkswagen Group, Ferdinand Piëch. And the brief on paper was actually quite simple. The car had to do everything. But in order to achieve that, the engineering exercises involved were incredibly complicated. So what do I mean by everything? So it had to do over 406 kilometers per hour. It had to be over 1,000 horsepower, which is why the Veyron is actually 1,001 horsepower. That one is a tip of the hat and gesture to successfully executing that brief. And importantly, it had to do 0 to 62 in 2.5 seconds and be as good on the road as it was on the track.
Porsche dropped the first 911 back in 1964 and fixed it up with an air-cooled rear-mounted engine behind the rear axle. What were they thinking? And yet somehow that platform lasted over 50 years and spawned hundreds of limited editions and of course a couple RSR race cars that snagged the crown. It even paved the path for the 935 Turbo, which is just straight manic. And that puppy took home the trophy in the 1979 Le Mans. This car is truly the granddaddy of gravel gripping, G-force pushing performance automotives. I think I just dented like the hood a little bit. And I think most of us know today that the 911 is still a great buy because enthusiasts appreciate its pedigree, precision, driver engagement, reliability, and not to mention, incredible value. Everyone knows that when you buy a Porsche, you expect it to stick to the highest possible standards. And they're really way up here.
Began life as a murderous dictator's dream, but became a symbol of peace and love around the world. And at one point, it was the best-selling car of all time. This is everything you need to know to get up to speed on the Volkswagen Beetle. It's 1934, and Germany's not doing so great. That summer, a failed artist named Adolf Hitler seized power after Germany's president Hindenburg died in his home at the age of 87. Hitler mandated that Germany have a state car, something the average family could afford. To bring the Volkswagen concept to life, the German government brought in a race car engineer named Ferdinand Porsche. Porsche's job was to make a vehicle that was small, yet big enough to fit a whole family, simple enough to use and maintain anywhere, and dependable enough that people could drive it practically forever.